If you're running a business that doesn't have process for what the business does on a daily basis, how you turn the lights on, where's the switch, how do you say hello, goodbye, what's the phone system look like? I mean, everything. If you don't have that, don't franchise. Once you have that, you're going to have to be just as systematic on the franchisor side. Hello, Suzanne.
Hello, Rick Mayo.
So we're the only two. You're the only one I can get on the podcast. You're as busy as everyone else, but I can always wrangle you into it.
Yeah,
Everyone
I'm
else
willing.
is like, I have no time for you. It's like training week. We have like 23 people in the room. Matt can't do it. Adam can't do it. Jared's too busy.
Right.
It's like, Suzanne, can you podcast with me? I feel like I'm asking somebody to come out to play.
I'm like, sure.
Knock on the door. Yep.
I had no warning.
I know. I just walked in. I'm like, we're podcasting.
Good thing I did my
I've got
hair
a topic.
today.
Yeah. I was about to say, you look nice. So I thought, okay, this is the day. Halftime, you just worked out like me.
I know, right?
Not presentable for the camera.
Right. I just come straight from the gym to work.
Well, it is a gym franchise.
That's right.
Or a fitness franchise. Or did you bring a dad joke, though?
I did.
All right, what
I
you
did.
got?
So what kind of exercises do lazy people do?
I don't know.
Diddly squat. Diddly squats.
I already read your mind, but I love it. So when your lady comes home in a white suit covered in bee stings and smelling like honey, you know she's a keeper. Yes. Dominate. Let me turn this off. Make noises. All right, folks. Well, we're back.
Gosh.
And Suzanne's back. This is probably like her 10th podcast now.
I don't know.
But love having her on. And she's actually the perfect guest for today because we are going to be talking about should you franchise your business or not?
Right.
And this question comes from, I do get questions from people who are in the fitness industry specifically that I know. Sure. And they're like, hey, I'm thinking about franchising my gym. Should I do it?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. I know. It sounds terrible to say that, but it's like, okay. But you really have to know what that means. So I thought, for the sake of those individuals and anybody that's looking at our franchise, they can understand maybe the inner workings of what makes it tick.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if you're either thinking about it or you ever want to know how it worked or you're thinking about becoming an Alloy franchisee, now you'll know how it works.
That's right.
And you'll know what we put into getting to franchising and where we are now.
That's right.
So I just have 3 points and you might have more, but I think it'll just keep us on track. What do you say?
Okay. Sure.
So the first one is I just have market research. And what I mean by that is you need some empirical evidence that your thing works. And I would suggest that you have more than one location and that you have more than one location in one market to know that it works. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a hamburger shop and you are in a downtown area and you have a line out the door every day at lunch and you make decent money out of the shop and you're like, we're onto something. We have the best hamburgers ever.
Yeah.
We have a couple little tricky things we do that no one else does. We should franchise. But then you would ask, okay, like, would this work in the suburbs? Is it only going to work in city centers?
Right. During lunch.
Is it really just lunch because it's people working in business? Have you tried one in the suburbs? Have you tried it in a rural market? Is it better in an urban market? I mean, there's so many questions to be answered that I think it really helps to have multiple corporate locations if you can. So like if you look at, if you look at ours, I mean, we've been in business for 30 years, 32 years, actually going on 33. We have had multiple locations, like, five or so years before we even decided to franchise, we opened a test facility based exactly on the franchise. Now in our larger franchise, we had different layers of training and we pulled out the special sauce layer and we stuck it in its own facility, which to say, would this thing really work? And it answered the question, right?
Right.
So we proved it out. And at the time, as a lot of people have heard, we had a big licensing company. So we had, at some point, we're in 2,500 door fronts from India to Dubai and everything in between. So we had a good view on like what works worldwide in the market, maybe where the gaps were, what we could fill in that market, right? And then enough corporate locations to build what's called an item 19, I think is a good idea. So what an item 19 is, for anybody not listening, is it's sort of your financial claims that you put in your financial documents, in your franchise documents, and they have to be validated. So they'd be audited and validated with numbers. Some franchises I can think of that was very beneficial for were, say, LE Mental Health, which is a franchise of ours that's under our same, they work with the same FSO that we do, right? They had 0 franchises open when they sold the first round or took on a round of equity.
Yeah, but they had 8, I think.
Yeah,
corporate.
somewhere around there. 8 to 10, 7, 8, maybe. Yeah, 7, 8 corporate locations in Minneapolis and had proven the model. So they had an item 19 and they had P&L, whatever they had in their item 19 from enough corporate stores to proof of concept, right? Granted, it was only one market, but I mean, I think that one's a little bit easier to understand where you're going to put that. And so they were able to come to market with some financial claims in more than one facility.
Right.
And then they were the only franchise in the mental health space. And I think that's something to consider as well. I mean, it wasn't lost on us that that fitness in franchising is super crowded, so you better have a niche, right? And that goes back to the market research. Like, are you really different? I think really different isn't like think of it through the lens of the consumer, right? Because that's how the investors or the value of it is. Your investors that are going to buy your franchise are typically going to understand what the value proposition is that they're buying into,
right?
And it needs to be differentiated. So
for sure, and we definitely had that.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. Like our big advantages were like time in the industry, and plus when you look at market research, I'll back up a bit. I also was working with some really big franchises, so I sort of understood the mechanisms and how it worked, and had a peek under the covers at how franchising works. So I knew that. Right, we were working within franchise structures quite a bit.
Yeah,
we had all this market research. We had a corporate facility open already. We had run licensing, and we had given people advice on the model that we thought was working at the time, even if it was privately branded, and people were opening them successfully, right, under their own brand. And so it was a lot of, again, air quoting, market research to get to the decision to franchise.
Right.
Do you agree? I
do agree. And you and I had talked about franchising a couple of times before we actually made the decision to do it. And both of us decided we're not ready yet. We don't have enough capital. We don't have enough. We don't have that corporate pilot store open yet. And so we just decided to wait. And I think in hindsight, that was a very wise decision.
Yeah, it's hard to wait because, you look at someone like me, and this used to happen even when I owned one facility, and my coaches would look at me and they're probably like, Rick just seems like a normal guy. He's not that smart. I could do that. And I don't blame them for feeling that way, but you also have to remember, like, I'm not saying that we're super smart, but like 32 years of experience in doing one thing really well is hard to replace, even if you're not that smart. It's like you're going to learn if you last for 32 years, right? And so if you don't have that, it's going to be difficult, I think. You don't have to have that long, but if you don't have enough funding to figure it out, and we'll get to that next. You're going to be up against it. So I would say make sure you really understand and you have your market research down, that you know, like for us, we have a gap in the market, that 45 to 65-year-old, it's a relevant market, 70% of the nation's disposable income lives in that 50-plus market.
Yeah.
We're selling a premium brand. You start to look at like what do other sectors do with premium brands? They fare the best in downturns in the economy. They're more insulated. So there's so many positive things. And by the way, the people that invest in our franchise typically have financial means to invest in something, so it puts them in the same age category.
Our franchisee investor is the same person as our members.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same.
And that manifests itself in them easily recognizing the value because they always say, I would do this if it was in my market. I love it. So it's like they can understand how their friends, people like them, would also love it.
Yeah.
And that's what they have to be able to visualize, right?
Sure.
So I think it needs to be dead simple. It needs to be easily understood by the investor, and then they can extrapolate how their consumer would understand it. Right. But to get that, you have to have enough market research to make sure there's a gap in the market. You have to be able to explain that gap. You have to have a backstory. Right. So just be cautious if you're like, hey, I've got this awesome thing.
Right.
I want to franchise it. I'm like, well, think about maybe multiple corporate locations and fix the thing really well so you can speak to
unit economics, all of the what the labor model looks like. You have to really have your ducks in a row.
Yeah, 100%. So I would say first and foremost, have enough market research to make sure you're making a relevant decision. Next I have is money. And I think that was one of the, you're laughing. That was one of the things that held us back early, because when you're running a business that is licensing lots of door fronts, it's a really good business. So the opportunity cost to pivot away from that business to go to franchising is not an easy decision, right? Because you're putting something to bed to pursue something that could potentially be bigger. Here's some realistic stats for you when it comes to like, will your franchise make it or not? We've said this on here a million times, but if you are a brick and mortar franchise with a location, only 15% will ever get 50 units or more open.
Right.
15. Only 2%
get over 100.
Get over 100. Yeah. 2%. So I hope it's you. And if you're listening to this, it's going to be us by the end of this year, but really be realistic about the percentage chances. I think if I told you, if you walk outside, you have a 98% chance of something falling on your head, right? You probably would never go outside. And so if I told you have a 98% chance to fail in your franchise, and maybe you'd never get 100 open, but like if you got sights on something big, right?
Right.
There's 98% chance you're not going to make it.
Well, there's a lot of franchises that are successful that don't have very many, but I mean, the success is relative.
Yeah, and if you want to do a bunch of corporate stores and have like half corporate, half friend, there's different strategies, right? Yeah. But that's expensive as well. So And I don't think there's a wrong answer, like maybe why franchise with money. It's like our model makes a better owner model, I think, than a franchise model from our standpoint, because the overall top line revenue is relatively low.
Right.
And that's what we benefit from as the franchisor. Franchisee doesn't care. They just want profit. They want return on investment. So, and I have to say this for franchising, it can be very profitable with a relatively low investment versus return ratio. So it really makes a better owner model. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with whether you want to do corporate or franchising. The main reason to go franchising is you can expand faster with other people's capital.
Yeah.
And then you're a fractionalized piece of what they have, relatively small, versus corporate, which is typically going to be a lot slower.
Yeah.
But if you do it right, it can be very lucrative. So there's not a wrong answer, but I would, either way, you're going to have to be very well capitalized.
100%. And whatever you think it's going to cost, you need to like triple that.
Yeah. It's like doing a project at your house. It's going to take 3 times as long and cost 3 times as much money or more. And so let's talk about the money a little bit so people understand what it takes to start a franchise. And this, again, for franchisees of ours, this will be interesting for you guys to hear maybe as well. So if you want to formulate a franchise, you're going to need to, you're going to need to build like your franchise Bible, which is essentially all of your documents and everything essentially. It's all your processes, right? You need to have something. You're also going to need to build all of your franchise documents. So your franchise disclosure documents, it's the most litigious business that I've ever been in and probably ever will be, I hope. And so other than like a regulated business like the airline business or medical or something, it's crazy. It's absolutely nuts.
There's so many laws around it and there's so many requirements and so many hoops to jump through. And that's on the federal level and the state level, because some states are registration states and you have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops for each of them or you can't do business in their state. So there's a lot to learn about franchising. And I think before anybody would even decide whether they want to go that route, they need to sit down at the table with somebody who's done it before and who's very familiar with it. There's all sorts of consultants that help people start franchising. And that's a 6-figure
so keep in mind when you sit down with that person, if their main role for you would be to help you put your franchise together, they're definitely going to be pro franchising. So think about just out of the gate, you're going to be well into the 6 figures to get a franchise set up. Now, I know I've heard from people like, I could set mine up for 50, 60K. I'm like, listen, you might, but I'm telling you right now, this is not a business or a sector that you want to get into and set something up on the cheap. Like, I'm not saying you have to spend all of your money on it, but you need good lawyers and people that really know what the heck they're talking about. Because if you set this thing up on a shaky foundation, it's never going to work. So spend the money. So think about, okay, I want a franchise. Just to say I want a franchise and get legally ready to franchise, you're in the hundreds of thousands. Check. Okay.
Right.
Next, now you have to market your franchise.
Right.
Where are you going to get?
How are you going to sell it?
How are you going to sell it to potential franchisees? And so there's organic marketing, which, we have a friend of mine runs a marketing agency for fitness, but he was recently approached by a franchisor who just started franchising. It's like, help me market this franchise. Now, I would say, I hope he does well with it, but I would say definitely if you're going to go that route, hire a firm that specializes in marketing franchising, right? And just keep in mind, those are also very expensive. So there's an entire cottage industry that supports franchising. And I would say that it's absolutely necessary and also obscenely expensive. Like everything in franchising is really expensive.
Everything costs $100,000.
Yeah, exactly. We were in licensing. We used to laugh because for 15 years, anytime I want to do anything, it'd be 10 grand. So I was like, hey, we need to change this. And we would laugh and let me guess.
It's going to be 10 grand.
And now we're in franchising. Let me guess, 100,000. It's like easy, right? So we start laughing. So anyway, have your ducks in a row and have your funding. And so not only funding to start, but then you have to fund the gap. So here's the route that we chose. So first of all, you got to know the game you're playing. Like study the game of franchising and decide how you're going to play the game. Because there's different ways to play it and depends on your goals. So we've always been slow and steady, and that served us well. And I think we've done enough slow and steady to have a very solid base. So when we got into franchising, we're like, look, we're not getting any younger, right? We would like to do something impactful. And we have, but you know what I mean? Like really impactful. Like
we don't have 20 years to do this. We've got to get this done.
Well, you don't. I mean,
I don't.
might.
You do.
Right. I'll come
just
visit you.
Barely.
It'll be like driving Miss Daisy, where I'm so old I can't even drive to see you anymore, even though I used to be your driver. I'll feed you pudding in the nursing home. But you really have to decide the game that you're in and how you're going to play the game. We decided instead of going slow with organic marketing, and we got crazy advice from people like, just do 2 or 3 a year. I'm like, dude, I would like to make a bigger impact. Forget about it financially. Like, we just invested several $100,000s to get the thing started. And you want me to open 2 or 3 franchises a year? I mean, what are we doing?
Well, and I mean, I guess if we were doing it all organically, we would be able to retain some of the franchise fee. But
that's a terrible business model.
You don't make any money until your royalty is sufficient.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So there's a couple ways that franchisors like us make money. There's a upfront franchise fee, right? Now, you will forever and a day hear that you don't want to use your franchise fees to fund your franchise growth. Right? Because you just never know if they're coming or not. Like, it can be sporadic. So you need to be well funded, right? So you not only have you got to incorporate your franchise, get everything set up, but then you have to cover the gap between the time that you start and when you start making money.
Right.
And that's an interesting dynamic. So the route that we've chosen, because we wanted to go a little bit quicker, was we are working in what's called the consultant networks.
Right.
There's probably 4, maybe 5 major ones.
Big ones, yeah.
Most of them you have to pay some money to put your product on the shelf, for lack of better terms. And they're this organization that sits between the franchisor and franchise consultants on the other side. And this franchise consultants go out and they have all their marketing efforts to find people that are either they want to get out of big corporate or they're looking for an investment opportunity.
Right.
And they will then present your product to, the consultant will present it to their candidate, and maybe they'll do 3 or 4. And it's not always like fitness to fitness. Sometimes it's like us versus outdoor lighting versus gutters versus, and you just have to decide what you want a day in the life. Yeah, exactly. Milkshakes, right? Whatever. And none of them are wrong and are all good. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, so by the time we get that lead and we close them, we have paid not only to get our product on the shelf, but to market within those networks. Because it's not just putting your product on the shelf. You have to actively market to those franchise consultants so that they understand who you are, and then you get a few good ones under your belt, and then you're good to go. But that takes time and money, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, think about how expensive that is. And then our franchise fee is around $60. It is $60,000 for one. If you do multiples, there's a discount. And the observation might be that, like, wow, that's a lot of money up front. Like, that you guys are making really great money. Well, I can tell you right now, and this is good for anybody to know, even our franchisees who maybe didn't know how this worked, we only collect maybe 15% of that fee. By the time we pay the franchise consultant, right, which that's their business model, and we have an outside sales company, and they're called a franchise sales organization, FSO. By the time we pay the consultant and the FSO, there is very little meat on the bone for us.
Well, and that doesn't include the money that we have to pay to the franchise network, the broker.
Right. The network itself takes a small spiff as well.
They take some off the top as well. And then we also have this team of people that are working in the background to.
All right. Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. So just to get the thing sold, if you want speed, it's going to cost you. And speed means we're working in the consulting networks. They have to be paid. The organizations that we're part of that we had to pay to put our product on the shelf, they need some cream off the top. And then we have an FSO. So we have an outside sales team. So instead of hiring everyone internally, they run a really good process and they put really good candidates in front of us, which is why our close rate from discovery day, which is the last step, is like, it's really high. But they do that because they run a tight 6-step, 6 to 8 week process. Vetting, it's double vetting, right? So if you look at it that way, the franchise fee, if anything, by the time someone signs up, pays the franchise fee, and then we run the real estate, we do all the things for them. By the time it's over, we are way underwater.
Way underwater.
So out of that $60,000, if it was just a single unit that we sold, we are way upside down. But by the time we pay commissions and then our labor and then all the other things that go into it. So we don't make money until the club gets open and they start making money. So I like that in the sense that it's the most aligned business ever. If we don't get a location open and making money, we don't make any money.
Right.
And so the optics might be that, like, wow, there's this big franchise fee. You guys make a lot of money on that. It's like, no, like, our goal is not just to sell, because we don't make squat on the sale.
Right.
We don't make it till you get open and you start making money.
Right.
And so that means, okay, not only do you have to sell it if you're just thinking about franchising your business. And listen, we studied the game and we chose to go faster, and it's going to be expensive. You could go slower, collect your franchise fee, but once again, the business model is not to try to make money off your franchise fee as the only source of your income. So for us to make money in the franchise, we have to get what's called royalty sufficient, right? And that means that we have to have enough clubs open at enough gross revenue so that our royalty percentage of their gross revenue covers our base expenses.
Correct.
We're going to be there at like 75 to 80 clubs, right? And right now we're not there yet. So think about when we started franchising. Now we had COVID, which set us back, but we started franchising at the end of 2019. Here we are at start of 2024, and we're still not even royalty sufficient yet. And we're moving really fast. In the fall, we were the fastest growing fitness franchise in the world.
Right.
Imagine that. And we're still not royalty sufficient, right? And so I just want people to hear that. And if you're a franchisee, you should probably know, like that big fat fee up front, that was nothing. That was barely the cost of getting you on the team for us. And then we're probably upside down by the time the labor to get you open.
No question.
So we are 100% committed to getting you open, getting you making money, period, right? So my point to anybody who wants to know whether they should franchise their business or not, you better have a lot of money because it's going to be in the millions and millions of dollars to get from building the thing, selling the thing, getting them open, and getting them making money. Right. And so that is the process. And so you better be well funded. Now we're rare in the sense that we always knew that we were going to pivot to something, and we had kicked around, like to your point, the idea of franchising for a long time. Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of cash on hand. I like cash on hand because it allows you to take advantage of opportunities and make decisions. We ran this long lens on it. We worked with franchises, all the market research, all the stuff. We opened the pilot facility. It worked out great, all those things. And then we said, okay, go. And then even with COVID, which we would have been in a much better place had COVID not hit, we were still able to fund that entire gap all the way till now and then fund it until later this year when we'll be royalty sufficient. Right. But man, that's a lot. And so,
there were times it was scary. Like, are we gonna make it this month? Like,
of course. Everybody does that. And we had enough funding as padding, to cover that. No sweat. But it's just interesting, right? It's an interesting dynamic. Now, you could get a round of funding, and a lot of franchises do that. They start out with VC money.
Yeah.
But if you're the founder and you have a great idea and you want to go and start and you want to get money early on, you're going to be so diluted.
You have to give up so much equity.
So much. I mean, you might, the person with the money's got the biggest stick because they have the most shares. So normally, if you're the founder and you have this crazy idea, they might come in and own 80% of it because they're funding it. You're busting your ass and working hard for 4 or 5 years in hopes that your 20% will be worth something if you had a big event at some point in the future. But again, it's only 20%. So we're thankful to have had enough cash on hand to cover the gap and are now growing and everything's going really well. But that's really rare. I mean, I told you I was listening to a podcast, and it was a private equity firm talking about what they think about franchising. And the guy's like, yeah, man, there's just friends and family rounds and VC money that we have to unfurl at the end. And he's like, I'll tell you what, if anybody ever gets to 100 clubs open and they're doing well, and it's just them and they're self-funded, he's like, that's a friggin' unicorn. We literally never see that. And of course, I know, right? We're high-fiving for those of you guys that aren't watching. But
there's two people at the cap table. You and me.
That's it. I always say, I go Suzanne and I. That's it. And so if we get there, we're going to be a real unicorn at that point.
Yeah, it's a good place to be.
It's a good place to be. Even from a point of pride, it's like, shit, look what we did. I mean, this business is obscenely hard, by the way. I'll tell you that too. Like, brace yourself. It's like crazy. It's nuts. It's way crazier than you can think. The stakes are higher, the reward's bigger, but it ain't for wimps, right? So brace yourself if you're getting into it. So I hope that helps. Like, first of all, have a thing that works. That's market research. Secondly, make sure that you're well funded because it's going to cost you several $100,000 to get the thing going. It's going to cost you a couple $1 million easy to cover the gap until you start making money. So be well funded. And if you need to go get funding before you start, that's fine. Just be prepared to be massively diluted, and you're going to have a much smaller piece of the pie, and you're still going to be doing the lion's share of the work because whoever's got the money has the biggest stick. That's typically how it works, right?
Right.
And then lastly, have a solid process. So just because you have a thing that works, man, you better have this sucker locked down. So for us, it's everything from our sales process is a solid process, if this, then that, all the way through. Once they sign on, it's like the real estate process, the build out, the project management-ish side of it, all of that. Okay, great. Now they're going to come to training for 5 days. Awesome. Then there's a pre-sale. Like, who's coaching these folks? Do you have a scaffolding built with tripwires for when to hire more support people if you're growing at a good pace? I mean, it's a monster, and you can hire consultants to help you with this, but I'll tell you, we've had a few, and they're also vastly different with their advice. What we sort of land on is like, hire a consultant. There's probably some nuggets in there that are going to help you, but there's no way to learn it other than to just do it, right?
But you never know what and we haven't loved all of our consultants because we just don't think alike. Right. Like the ones that recommend that we open 2 or 3 a year, it's like, okay, we're not doing that. But what we do get are connections, like how we found our amazing attorney.
Yeah, that's right.
recommendations, just connections to people and things of that nature, then that way, you end up with a team and like the best of the best.
Right.
So I would say consultants might not align with you or what you have in mind, but you just cherry pick the good stuff.
Right. And consultant's funny, like I used to be a consultant, in the fitness industry, and sort of like, you have to earn your keep, right? And everybody's got their shtick. So you bring someone in and they're going to have their thing. And it's like a lot of times if they gave you nothing and said, wow, you're on a great trajectory, you're doing amazing, there's no reason to hire them,
they'd be out of business.
So they're going to have to be like, well, I would go a little slower, and like, okay, got it. And listen, there's probably something in there, but take some of it with a grain of salt,
right,
and know that sometimes it's just the connections through, like you mentioned, that would have been, at least for us anyway. But have a solid process. So we have a manual that's like 600, 700, 800 pages, and it's ever evolving because process evolves, and everything we do is constantly evolving. That's always going to happen. But you better have a tight process. And so I have seen franchises where they sell the franchise and they're like, okay, we'll go find a place. Well, it's like if you're coming out of big corporate, you've never found commercial real estate.
And it's not easy. It's not like finding a house.
No, and there's all these nuances, and like there's insurance considerations on your lease, and there's like you need to hire legal to review your lease.
Right.
I mean, there's a ton of stuff to do it well and to do it right. And we have all those resources. So if you're going to be franchising, you're going to need to put these things in place if you're going to be successful. Or you're going to spend all this upfront money. You're going to get a few in market. They're going to stumble. And I'll tell you, if your franchisees aren't doing well, your validation is going to go down the tubes. The best way to be successful is to make your franchisee successful. And so make sure you have a solid process for everything in the business, not just for just the brick and mortar. Like, that's a given. Like if you're running a business that doesn't have process for what the business does on a daily basis, how you turn the lights on, where's the switch? How do you say hello, goodbye? What's the phone system look like? Everything. If you don't have that, don't franchise. Once you have that, you're going to have to be just as systematic on the franchisor side, right?
Right.
So the process is there.
100%.
It's like, who's doing what? Who updates the manual? Who does your marketing? Like there's a lot to do. And I'm not trying to make it sound more difficult than it is. If you are an entrepreneur and you've got your eyes on franchising, go for it. But I'm just trying to be realistic with what it really means, right? Yeah. Make sure you actually have a relevant thing. Don't fall in love with your product. Let your consumers tell you whether or not it's relevant enough, whether there's enough runway there to actually go big and franchise this thing. Secondly, have enough money because it's going to cost you millions of dollars. And I'm not exaggerating. No. How many millions? I don't know. But millions to get from zero to break even from your royalties. Franchise fees, just count those as like cost of acquisition. They're not going to make a lot of money on those. And then lastly, have a tight process, not only for the business side, what the business does, because that's a given, but also for your franchise side as well.
And I'd like to add one more.
Please.
Have a very good sense of humor, because it is crazy. Like we're at the point now where it's just like, well, it's just franchising. Like it just rolls off our back when crazy things happen.
100%. And it's never ending. It is like drinking from a fire hose of unique happenings on a daily basis. So none of them are bad. They're just,
it's like, what?
There's people involved. So there's that.
Yeah.
There's franchising's crazy, processing. It's nuts. It is. And so, we've been forewarned that at that 40 to 60 location point, things get messy. And that's where we are now. We're definitely feeling that, And so it's my job, and certainly your job, to make sure that the team knows that this is normal.
Yeah.
Like, I know that you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. I know that you think that our franchisees don't like us at times. That is not true. This is the nature of franchising.
Right.
I love the little book that I give to folks from Greg Nathan, who basically parallels franchising to parenthood, right?
Yes.
It's like, franchisees are, again, not in a derogatory way, but they're like the children, and they go through these phases, and they all go through the phases. They might go through them in 6 months or 2 years. It doesn't matter. But, they're infants. They need you for everything, and you're the greatest thing ever, right? That's early on. And then they're 2 years old, and they're kind of like,
no.
And then they're teenagers, and they fucking hate you, and they wish that you would just go away and leave them alone and all this stuff. And then they're young adults. They're like, all right, I guess you weren't that dumb. It's like Mark Twain said about his dad. He's like, you got a lot smarter between my ages of 18 and 22.
Right.
Like, go figure. And then eventually they have their own kids. They're in their 30s, and they're like, I don't want to hang out with you every weekend, but I appreciate what you've done for me. I get you now, right? And sometimes that takes 6 months, or sometimes it takes 2 years.
Right.
But that's a trajectory that a lot of franchisees go through. Not all of them, but most of them.
Right.
And so if you're not prepared for that, it's just hard emotionally, right?
Yeah.
We're definitely wired for it because it's like, look, we get it. I mean, you're longer in the tooth. I'm certainly longer in the tooth. It's like we've been through a lot of shit. So it's like for us, we don't panic. When we're up against what would seem like challenging ideas. So I would look, man, any business, you want to expand and do all corporate facilities, you're going to have different challenges, but just as challenging. So
sure.
But I would say it's one of our core values, and certainly a great sense of humor.
It saves the day every time.
Well, a lot of times I come in and you're like, all right, check this out. And I'm like, what? And then we just start laughing because there's literally nothing else to be done. Like there's no action to be taken. There's no, it's not like a compliance issue. It's just a thing. And we just look at each other and start laughing and we're like, franchising. And then we just walk off and laugh. It's like the best. We love it.
It's awesome.
If you're a franchisee, I hope this helps you understand like maybe the process that we went through to get you here on our team. If you're thinking about franchising, I hope that helps you too. And like Suzanne early on was just kidding, like, don't do it. I think if you have a realistic view and you think you can really make it, just be very realistic, right? Do you have a unique proposition? Do you have enough money to cover the gap? And is everything tightened up process-wise? You can hire people to do that. But again, it probably goes back to money. Here's what I'll say. If you have enough money, if you have stupid money and you don't mind losing a ton of it, you can probably figure it out, right? Eventually, you'll just keep figuring it out with extra money. If you have a bunch of money, you probably don't have a problem. You just keep solving the problem until you figure it out. Right. And it might break or it might not. But if you can lose all that money and ride off into the sunset as one of the franchises that sort of disappears, right? Have at it. But if you can't, you better have all your stuff tightened up because it's going to cost you a lot of money. And like at my age, to invest this much money in a vehicle like this, it's like, it's got to work. Right. So
it's just a hard thing to do. And when I said don't do it, that was just me kind of joking. But it's like, in some ways, and I can think of some other things that might be parallel in life. Like if you knew how hard it was going to be, nobody would ever do it.
Right.
So, but it's worth it in the end. It's like having a baby or something. Right. Like if you knew how painful that was going to be and how many years but it's all worth it. It's all worth it.
I heard a guy, I was listening to a book and he was talking about getting a dog.
Right.
And he was talking about how love is like insane. He's like, getting a dog is literal insanity because you get this thing that you'll never love anything this much in your entire life. And it's going to end so tragically. It is going to absolutely break your heart. And you're going to do it again and again and again and again. It's literally the definition of insanity, but it's worth it. And I think business is a lot like that. Like it's going to be horrible at times. It's going to test you to your core. But again, it's like love. It's like it's nuts. We sign up for it and do it again. And I think that's what life's all about. Right. Like that's the bravest thing to do is like, no, it's going to be hard. Be scared as shit of it, but you do it anyway. It's not like you mitigate all your risk. You never will. So you got to take your shot. Exactly. So have a lot of money. Shoot your shot if you want to. If you don't want to risk it, don't because the percentage chances are pretty small. But hope that helps everyone. And thanks for sitting in at last minute.
You're welcome.
Killed the dad joke, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Diddly squats.
See you guys next time.
See ya.